She paid much of the money used to buy the house, but her brother's name was on the property. For years, nobody seemed to question the arrangement, until the family disagreed about who the house actually belonged to. The sister said it was hers. Her brother said it was his. And eventually, they ended up in court. The question was surprisingly simple. Was this really a borrowed name purchase, or had the money simply been financial support between family members? The answer would determine who kept the house. 2008. How it started. The story began in 2008 in southern China. The people identified in the published case materials are referred to as Mei and Rong. They were siblings. At the time, Mei already owned 2 properties. According to her account, she wanted to purchase another home, but because of the housing restrictions in place at the time, she could not easily purchase the property in her own name. Her younger brother, Rong, had recently started working. He also had a collective household registration, so the family discussed another possibility. Rong would appear on the purchase documents. Mei would provide much of the money. At first, the arrangement probably seemed straightforward. The property would be purchased in Rong's name, but Mei would provide the funds, and the family would understand what that meant. There was only one problem. They did not clearly put that understanding into a written agreement. And years later, that missing document would become extremely important. The house, 820,000 yuan. The property cost 820,000 yuan. Mei paid a cash deposit of 43,700 yuan to the previous owner. Then Rong signed the real estate purchase contract. In September 2010, the property was transferred and registered in Rong's name. A mortgage registration was also made. On paper, the ownership record was clear. Rong's name was on the property, but the payment history told a different story. According to the published court account, Mei paid the down payment. She also paid relevant taxes, and she made the mortgage payments before April 2013. After that point, Rong began making the mortgage payments himself. And now, there were 2 different stories inside the same house. The registration said one thing, the money trail appeared to say another, but neither one, by itself, answered the most important question. Why had Mei paid the money? Was she paying because she owned the property? Was she helping her brother? Was she providing financial support to the family? Or had the siblings actually agreed that Rong would only hold the property in his name for her? That question would eventually become the center of the case. 2013. The family dispute. In early May 2013, the disagreement became explicit. The parents wanted the house to go to Rong. Mei disagreed. She maintained that the property had been purchased using her money, and according to her account, Rong's name had only been used because of the circumstances surrounding the purchase. She was willing to let her parents live in the property during their retirement, but she did not agree that the house should simply become Rong's. And this is where a family arrangement became a property dispute. Mei had one interpretation of the past, Rong had another. He denied that there had been a borrowed name purchase agreement. According to his response reported in the case materials, he maintained that the property had been purchased for him by his parents. He also said that Mei had helped with the purchase because she was familiar with the process. He disputed the idea that her payments automatically meant she owned the house, and suddenly, the same transactions had completely different meanings. To Mei, the payments were evidence of ownership. To Rong, they were not. 7 years later, the lawsuit. The dispute did not immediately become a lawsuit. Years passed. Then, by May 2020, the conflict had escalated. Mei brought the case before a district court. She asked the court to order Rong to transfer the property into her name. She also asked him to cooperate in removing the mortgage registration. Her argument focused heavily on the financial history. She pointed to the money she had paid. She pointed to property-related expenses she had covered. And she pointed to the fact that the phone number associated with the bank loan was hers. From her perspective, the evidence supported one conclusion. She had paid for the property. Wrong's name had only been used because of the circumstances at the time, but the court was not being asked simply to determine who had paid more money. It had to determine what those payments meant, the question the court had to answer. This distinction is critical. The case was not simply who paid. The court had to determine whether the evidence established a genuine borrowed name purchase arrangement. In other words, had May and Wrong actually agreed that Wrong would appear as the registered buyer while May remained the real owner? Or could May's payments reasonably have another explanation? Because inside a family, money can move for many reasons. A payment can be a loan. It can be financial assistance. It can be a gift. It can be repayment. Or it can be part of a property purchase. The payment itself does not necessarily tell the court which one it was, and that was the problem. May could show that she had paid substantial amounts, but she also had to show the agreement behind those payments. May submitted payment records. Those records supported the fact that she had paid the deposit. They supported payments toward the property. They supported taxes and mortgage payments made during the earlier period. But the court still had to ask, what did those payments establish? May also submitted WeChat conversations. She relied on those conversations to support her claim that the property had been purchased under Wrong's name on her behalf. But according to the court's reasoning, those messages did not clearly establish that the siblings had agreed to such an arrangement when the property was purchased. And there was another complication. They were close relatives. That mattered because financial transactions between family members can have several possible explanations. A relative paying money does not automatically mean that relative owns the asset. So the court needed evidence connecting the payments to a specific ownership agreement, not simply evidence that money had changed hands, but evidence showing what had the siblings actually agreed. That missing link became decisive, the turning point. This is where the case changed. The question was no longer who paid the money. It became, what did the money prove? May had evidence of payment, but the court did not find sufficient evidence proving the specific agreement she relied upon. The financial records could show that she had contributed money. The messages could provide context. The loan information could show a connection between her and the financing. But together, the evidence still did not sufficiently establish that Wrong had agreed to hold the property in his name for May. And without proving that agreement, the ownership claim became much harder to sustain. The judgment. The court did not recognize the claimed borrowed name arrangement as sufficiently proven. The court found that May had not provided enough evidence establishing that she and Wrong had agreed that the property would belong to her while being registered in his name. She had demonstrated substantial payments, but she had not sufficiently proven the agreement those payments were supposed to represent. The court, therefore, rejected her claims. The registration in Wrong's name remained. After the judgment, May did not appeal. The judgment became legally effective. And that was the end of the legal battle, but not necessarily the end of the family story. The public record does not establish what happened between the siblings afterward. It does not establish that Wrong deliberately deceived May. It does not establish that he planned to take the property from her, and it does not establish whether their relationship was eventually repaired. Those details simply are not established by the published materials. What the court did and did not decide. It is tempting to tell this story as simply as possible. A sister paid, a brother's name was on the house, the sister lost. But that version leaves out the most important part. The court was not deciding whether May had ever paid money. The records showed that she had. The court was deciding what those payments legally established, and that is a much narrower question. The published record does not prove that this was a deliberate betrayal. It proves something more complicated. There was a property. There was money paid by one sibling. There was registration in another sibling's name. There was a family disagreement over the meaning of that arrangement, and there was not enough evidence in the court's view to prove the ownership agreement claimed by May. That distinction determined the outcome. The real lesson. The most important detail in this case is not the 820,000 yuan price. It is the missing agreement. May had evidence showing that she had paid substantial amounts, but payment records answer only one question: who paid? They do not necessarily answer who was supposed to own the property. A bank transfer can prove that money moved. A receipt can prove that someone paid. A mortgage record can show who made a payment. A message can provide context. But none of these facts, standing alone, necessarily establishes the complete agreement between two people, especially when those two people are family. Family members often rely on trust. They assume everyone remembers the same conversation. They assume nobody will change their mind. They assume the arrangement will never need to be explained to a stranger. But years later, when the family disagrees, memory becomes difficult to prove, and a court cannot decide ownership based only on what each person remembers. It needs evidence. One person provides the money. Another person's name goes on the property. Everyone believes they understand the arrangement, until they don't. Then the question changes. It is no longer, "What did we say back then?" It becomes, "What can you prove today?" In this case, the payments were real. The financial history was real. The family dispute was real. But the court found that the borrowed name ownership arrangement was not sufficiently proven, and that difference determined who kept the property. This is why family property arrangements can become so complicated. Trust can make an agreement feel unnecessary, but when the relationship breaks down, the missing paperwork can become the most important piece of evidence. Sometimes the most expensive part of a family agreement isn't the money. It's the part nobody thought they needed to write down.